It was just past 9 p.m. when a man in a worn leather jacket and a black cap walked through the revolving doors of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel in Los Angeles. He carried no entourage, no flashy luggage, just a simple duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The front desk clerk, Mark, barely glanced up at first. It was a busy evening, and the lobby was alive with murmured conversations and the soft clinking of glasses from the nearby lounge. But as the man approached, Mark did a double take. "No way," he thought. "That looks like Keanu Reeves." But something was off. Celebrities usually arrived in style, chauffeured black SUVs, assistants making arrangements ahead of time, sometimes even personal security. This man, however, had made a standard online booking under an unrecognizable name. No VIP requests, no special treatment. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Grand Metropolitan," Mark said, maintaining professionalism despite the curiosity bubbling inside him. The man simply nodded. "Thanks," he said, his voice calm, familiar yet unassuming. Mark glanced at the reservation. Jonathan Rivers. The alias was unremarkable, but Mark had seen enough guests to know this was Keanu Reeves. "You're staying for how many nights?" Mark asked, half expecting an assistant to step in and handle the details. "Just one," Keanu replied. "Wanted to check the place out." He handed over his ID, perfectly matching the alias, and a black credit card. Mark hesitated for a fraction of a second before swiping it. If Keanu wanted anonymity, he wasn't about to be the one to ruin it. The hotel wasn't just another luxury stop for Keanu. It was partially his. While not widely publicized, Keanu was one of the silent investors in the hotel chain. But instead of overseeing operations from an executive suite or attending polished board meetings, he chose to experience it as a guest, without the filters of celebrity privilege. Have you ever seen something that changed the way you saw a place forever? Let us know where you're watching from. And don't miss tomorrow's story. Subscribe now for another powerful real-life moment. Now, back to the story. Because what Keanu was about to discover next would change everything. A soft ding signaled the room key being processed. Mark slid it across the counter. "Room 726. Let us know if you need anything, Mr. Rivers." Keanu gave a small nod and took the keycard. "Appreciate it." With that, he slung his duffel bag over his shoulder and walked towards the elevators, disappearing into the crowd like any other traveler. But what he didn't know yet, what no one knew, was that this quiet, seemingly routine stay was about to take an unexpected turn. That night, after wandering the hotel, Keanu would find himself in the dimly lit lounge area, and as he drifted into half-sleep in one of the oversized leather chairs, he would overhear something that would change his entire perception of the place he had quietly helped build. Keanu Reeves wasn't new to luxury. He had stayed in the grandest hotels across the world, from Tokyo to Paris, from New York to Dubai. But the Grand Metropolitan felt different. Not because of its gold-trimmed decor or its private rooftop dining experience. Not because of the imported marble floors or the art pieces worth millions. It felt different because of something less tangible, the atmosphere. It was beautiful, but it wasn't warm. Keanu checked into room 726, a sleek but understated suite on the 7th floor. He didn't linger long. Instead, he placed his duffel bag down, ran a hand over the crisp white bedding, and then did something unusual for someone of his status. He left his room to wander the hotel like any ordinary guest. Dressed in his casual attire, worn boots, black jeans, and a loose charcoal-colored t-shirt, he looked like a traveler on a work trip. No one took much notice of him, and that's exactly what he wanted. A staff member from housekeeping, Maria, later recalled seeing him. He didn't act like a celebrity. He walked the halls slowly, looking around like he was taking mental notes. I even passed him once while vacuuming, and he nodded at me like he was just another guest. Keanu wasn't there to be served. He was there to observe. He ordered a simple meal from room service, grilled chicken, a side of rice, and a bottle of sparkling water. Instead of requesting it be brought up, he chose to eat downstairs, blending in with the late-night diners. A young waiter, Andrew, brought his plate to his table. I swear, I recognized him right away, but he wasn't acting famous, you know. No fancy orders, no attitude. Just a guy eating alone, listening more than speaking. I think I was more nervous than he was, Andrew later laughed. Keanu engaged in light conversation with Andrew, asking about his shift, how long he had been working there, and whether the job was treating him well. I thought he was just a friendly guest. I had no idea he was part owner of the place. It wasn't just a meal, it was research. The energy of a place is not just about its walls, it's about its people. And that night, Keanu felt it. As the night deepened, Keanu roamed quietly, hands in his pockets, stepping into different spaces. The lobby, the lounge, the staff hallways, the loading docks where night shift workers took their breaks. That's when he started noticing things. The staff walked quickly but not happily. The smiles were polite but not natural. Conversations among workers were brief, almost hesitant. This wasn't a toxic workplace. No one seemed outright miserable, but something was off. It felt like a place where people worked hard but weren't necessarily happy. Keanu saw a concierge helping a couple with their bags, his voice cheerful, but as soon as they walked away, his shoulders slumped. He watched a young housekeeper carry an overloaded cart, pausing to rub her wrists, a sigh escaping before she disappeared behind a door. Little details, small human moments that spoke volumes. Keanu had seen this before in Hollywood, the machine of an industry, running smoothly but wearing people down behind the scenes. And then, past midnight, he settled into a dimly lit lounge chair in the hotel's lobby. The glow of the chandelier above cast long shadows. Soft music played from the speakers. Most guests had retired to their rooms. That's when he heard it. Two employees, not realizing he was there, whispered to each other in hushed tones. "I wish this place treated us like people, not just workers." "Yeah, but what can we do? It's not like the owners care." Keanu didn't react. His eyes remained closed. But he was listening. And what he heard would change everything. The lounge was nearly empty. A few guests lingered over half-finished drinks, their conversations muted by the soft hum of instrumental jazz playing overhead. The warm glow of the fireplace flickered against the dark wood-paneled walls, casting restless shadows. Keanu sat still in one of the oversized leather chairs, his head tilted slightly forward as if lost in thought. His breathing was steady, his posture relaxed. He looked asleep. And that's when the whispering began. Two employees stood behind him, their voices barely audible over the ambient sounds of the room. "You ever think about quitting?" "All the time. But where would I go? Every hotel's the same, long hours, minimum pay, no real appreciation." Keanu's eyes remained closed, but his mind was fully awake now. "I love working with people, you know, but sometimes I feel like we're just part of the furniture. Guests don't even look at us. Management only talks to us when something's wrong." "Yeah, and when's the last time we got a raise? Or hell, even a proper thank you?" The voices were exhausted, not angry. This wasn't a rant. It was the quiet resignation of people who had long accepted that their hard work would never truly be seen. Keanu felt something tighten in his chest. He had come here to observe, to experience his own hotel from a guest's perspective. But in this moment he realized he had been looking at the wrong thing. It wasn't about the luxury of the hotel. It wasn't about the service efficiency. It was about the people who made the place run. And, at that moment, he wasn't Keanu Reeves, the world-famous actor. He wasn't a millionaire. He was just a man sitting in a chair, overhearing something that no owner was ever supposed to hear. He didn't move. He didn't turn around to interrupt the conversation. He simply sat there, listening, absorbing every word. The employees spoke for another minute or two before their voices trailed off, the conversation dissolving into silence. Keanu sat there for a long time afterward, thinking. The weight of their words pressed down on him. He had invested in this hotel chain because he believed in the vision of true hospitality. He wanted to be part of something that provided comfort, warmth, a place where guests felt special. But what about the people making that experience possible? Had they ever felt special? Had they ever felt seen? Had he ever seen them? Finally, he opened his eyes. He sat up slowly, running a hand through his hair, exhaling softly. And in that moment, a decision was made. Tomorrow, he wouldn't be checking out. Tomorrow, he was going to do something that no one, especially not the hotel's management, would see coming. Keanu had come to observe, but now he was about to intervene. And in the next 24 hours, the Grand Metropolitan would never be the same again. Keanu Reeves had made up his mind. He wasn't leaving the Grand Metropolitan, not yet. He had come to experience his own hotel from the perspective of a guest. But after overhearing that whispered conversation, he realized he had been looking at the wrong experience. It wasn't about how well the towels were folded or how luxurious the suites felt. It was about the people who kept the place running, the ones whose hands made everything look effortless. And now, he needed to hear more. Directly. The next morning, while guests enjoyed their gourmet breakfast spreads and room service orders, Keanu walked the back corridors, the places where the real work happened. It was just past 7:30 a.m. when he passed through a narrow hallway behind the kitchen, lined with lockers, break room doors, and an old vending machine that barely worked. The energy here was different. Staff hurried through, balancing trays, checking schedules, adjusting uniforms. It was a world behind the curtains, one that most hotel guests would never see. And Keanu wasn't here to be a guest anymore. He stepped into the employee break room, a small, windowless space with a coffee machine that looked like it had been there since the early 2000s. A few staff members were on their break, some scrolling through their phones, some stirring sugar into their coffee cups. They barely looked up when he entered. "Mind if I sit here?" Keanu asked, gesturing toward an empty chair. A young housekeeper, Elena, glanced up at him. She looked like she'd been working for years longer than her age suggested. "Sure," she said hesitantly, sliding her bag over to make space. Keanu sat, his movements casual but purposeful. He took a sip from the cheap coffee in front of him and let a moment of silence pass. Then, without revealing who he was, he asked a simple question. "What's it like working here?" At first, there was hesitation. The employees glanced at each other, unsure of how much to say. Then, Elena spoke. "It's fine," she started, but there was a weight behind the word. She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, staring into it as if debating whether to continue. Keanu just listened, offering no judgment. So she kept going. "I mean, it's not the worst job. The hotel's beautiful. The guests are mostly polite. But it's hard, you know? Most of us are running on 4-5 hours of sleep." The others at the table nodded. "Paychecks barely stretch," said Luis, a night shift bellhop. "Tips are hit or miss. Some guests are great, but others, they act like we're invisible." A concierge named David leaned forward. "Did you know we get trained to never refuse a request even if it's impossible?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Someone once asked me to book them a private helicopter in 20 minutes. When I said I needed more time, they complained to management." Keanu's hands tightened slightly around his coffee cup. The stories kept coming. Housekeeping staff were constantly understaffed, expected to turn over rooms in record time, often skipping breaks. Kitchen workers rarely got to eat the same food they prepared for guests. Wages hadn't been increased in years, even though room rates had gone up. And, worst of all, they never felt seen. "We smile because we have to," Elena said, finally meeting Keanu's eyes. "Not because we feel happy." And there it was. The truth, spoken plainly. Keanu sat there, absorbing everything. These weren't people bitter about their jobs. They loved hospitality. They took pride in making guests comfortable. But no one had ever made them feel comfortable in return. The weight of it settled deep in his chest. He could have walked away. He could have written a quiet check for bonuses and left, knowing he had done something good. But a check wouldn't fix this. This wasn't about money, it was about culture. And if he was truly an owner in this hotel, then he had a responsibility to change it. Keanu finished his coffee and stood up. "Thanks for talking to me," he said simply, his voice genuine. Elena gave him a small, tired smile. But as he walked out of the break room and into the main lobby, he already knew his next move. The staff didn't feel seen. So he was about to make sure they were. And in the next few hours, the Grand Metropolitan's management was going to get a wake-up call they'd never forget. By the time Keanu walked back into the main lobby, his mind was set. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel prided itself on being a symbol of luxury. 5-star service, A-list clientele. But behind the pristine glass doors, the reality for its employees was far from glamorous. And Keanu had just witnessed it firsthand. He wasn't just going to fix this quietly, he was going to shake the entire foundation. By noon, the hotel's senior management team had received an urgent summons. They were confused. Investors didn't just show up unannounced, let alone call impromptu meetings in the middle of a workday. But this was Keanu Reeves, a man who rarely made demands. So, when the managers arrived at the executive boardroom on the top floor, they expected the usual investor check-in. Some PR talk, maybe a discussion about quarterly profits. Instead, they walked in to find Keanu sitting at the far end of the long mahogany table. No assistants, no formalities. Just him. The silence was heavy as the last manager took their seat. Keanu leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. He wasted no time. "I spent the last 24 hours as a guest in this hotel," he started. His voice was calm, but there was a quiet intensity behind it. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. Keanu continued. "I ate in the restaurant. I walked the halls. I spoke to the staff. And I need you all to understand something. This place may be luxury for the guests, but it's a machine grinding down the people who work here." A murmur spread across the table. One of the senior managers, Richard Lawson, cleared his throat. "Mr. Reeves, I assure you we have some of the most competitive wages in the hospitality industry." Keanu cut him off. "That's corporate language. I'm talking about reality." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I listened to a conversation last night. 2 employees talking about how they feel invisible, overworked, underappreciated. I spoke to housekeepers who skip meals to turn over rooms faster. I heard from bellhops who work double shifts just to afford rent. And I met kitchen staff who make world-class meals but can't afford a decent one for themselves." The weight of his words settled over the room. No one spoke. Then Keanu sat back and delivered the words that sent shockwaves through the team. "This ends today, effective immediately. We're overhauling the way we treat our employees." One of the managers hesitated. "What exactly do you mean by overhauling?" Keanu pulled out a notepad. "Here's what's happening. Starting now. Wage increases across the board. No more minimum wage pay for essential workers. Salaries would be adjusted to reflect the true value of their work. Profit sharing for staff. A portion of hotel profits would be redistributed to employees through quarterly bonuses, ensuring everyone benefits, not just top executives. Mandatory breaks and better scheduling. No more skipping breaks due to understaffing. Extra hires would be made to prevent burnout. Mental health and wellness support. Free counseling sessions, stress management workshops, and an anonymous employee feedback system. A guest and staff equality policy. A new training model ensuring guests recognize staff as human beings, not just service providers. Rude or entitled behavior, not tolerated. Meal accessibility for workers. Kitchen staff would now have access to high-quality meals during shifts, just like guests. These aren't suggestions. Keanu finished, his gaze steady. These are happening. The room was dead silent. Some managers looked stunned, others nervous. A few exchanged glances, clearly calculating the financial impact. Finally, Richard, the senior manager, spoke again. "Mr. Reeves, I understand your concerns, but these kinds of changes require extensive cost evaluations. Adjusting wages, implementing profit sharing, this could cut deeply into our margins. Investors will have questions." Keanu's response was immediate and firm. "Then tell them to call me. I'll answer their questions personally." He let the words settle before adding, "But what I won't do is back down." The meeting ended with stunned silence. Management had never dealt with an investor like this. By the end of the day, Keanu's orders would ripple through the entire hotel, and by the time word got out, the hospitality industry was about to witness a revolution. By the time the sun set over the Grand Metropolitan, the hotel was already changing. News of Keanu's meeting had spread like wildfire. Employees whispered in hallways, exchanging skeptical glances. Managers scrambled, reviewing policies that had been untouched for years. Some executives called their legal teams, wondering if any of this could be stalled. But Keanu wasn't waiting for permission. The changes were already in motion. At exactly 9 a.m. the next morning, an internal memo was sent to all employees. Effective immediately, all staff wages have been revised to reflect industry-leading compensation. New pay structures will be released individually. Profit-sharing plans will be implemented in the next quarter. For many workers, this was the first real raise they had seen in years. Luis, the night shift bellhop, read the email 3 times before it sank in. "Wait, is this real?" he asked, holding up his phone. Elena, the housekeeper, burst into tears in the break room. "This means I can actually—" She choked on her words, covering her mouth. She didn't even finish her sentence. She didn't have to. Her coworkers knew what it meant. Bills wouldn't pile up. Overtime wouldn't feel like survival. Life would finally feel lighter. But the biggest reactions weren't just from the employees. It was the guests. By noon, something strange was happening. The hotel still looked the same. Polished, elegant, every detail pristine. But the atmosphere? Completely different. For the first time in a long time, the staff smiled, and meant it. Housekeepers greeted guests warmly instead of rushing past them. Bellhops offered genuine recommendations instead of mechanical pleasantries. Waiters in the dining room engaged in conversation rather than taking orders like robots. And the guests noticed. A businessman from London commented to his colleague, "The service here is different. I've been coming for years, and I swear the staff seems happier." A wealthy couple dining in the rooftop restaurant overheard a server talking about the hotel's changes. "So, the employees actually got a raise? Profit sharing?" the woman asked, adjusting her designer bracelet. The waiter nodded, smiling. "Yes, ma'am. Management wants us to feel valued, so we can make guests feel the same way." The couple exchanged glances. "That's actually kind of amazing." The domino effect was beginning. Not everyone was thrilled. A handful of high-profile guests, the kind who relished their elite status, weren't happy about the shift. One particular guest, a billionaire investor, noticed a subtle but unmistakable change. He was used to staff hovering around him, anticipating his every move. But today, the concierge greeted him warmly, but didn't grovel. The server at breakfast smiled, but didn't bow. The power dynamic had shifted, and he hated it. Later that afternoon, the investor approached the front desk, his voice sharp. "I've been coming here for years. Something feels off. The staff isn't as attentive." Mark, the front desk clerk, didn't flinch. "Sir, our employees are still providing top service. We've just ensured they're treated fairly while doing it." The investor scoffed. "This is what happens when you start paying employees too much. They get comfortable. Hospitality is about knowing your place." A silence stretched between them. Mark opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a familiar voice cut in. "Actually, hospitality is about respect." The investor turned to see Keanu standing right behind him. The room went dead silent. Keanu's voice was calm but firm. No one works harder than these people. They deserve everything they've been given. And if that makes the service feel different to you, maybe you should reconsider what you think a luxury really means." The investor's face hardened. He opened his mouth, then shut it. Without another word, he turned and walked out the door. Mark stared at Keanu. "Did you just lose us a high-profile guest?" Keanu shrugged. "Maybe, but we just gained something more important." Mark grinned. Respect. By the end of the day, the changes at the Grand Metropolitan weren't just hotel policy. They were making headlines. And by the next morning, the entire hospitality industry would be talking about what Keanu Reeves had done. A year had passed since Keanu Reeves made the decision that would forever change the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. And the effects? Undeniable. What had started as a single night of quiet observation had sparked a revolution in the way hospitality workers were treated, not just in this hotel, but across the entire industry. Because when word got out that an A-list actor had rewritten the rules of luxury service, other hotels were forced to take notice. The first and most obvious change was the staff. For the first time in years, they weren't just surviving, they were thriving. Employee turnover dropped by 60%. Productivity increased by 45%, without requiring overtime. Guest satisfaction scores skyrocketed because the service now came from employees who actually wanted to be there. Luis, the former night shift bellhop, had been promoted to front desk supervisor. "I used to think I'd never move up," he admitted. "Now I have a career, not just a job." Elena, the housekeeper who once cried in the break room, had been able to send her daughter to a better school. "Before, I felt like my work was invisible. Now, I feel like I matter." And it wasn't just about money. It was about dignity. When Keanu first proposed these radical changes, skeptics warned that the hotel would suffer financially. Profit sharing will cut into margins. Higher wages mean higher costs. Making employees equal to guests will hurt the brand. They couldn't have been more wrong. 12 months later, the Grand Metropolitan had recorded its highest revenue in over a decade. How? Because guests weren't just paying for luxury anymore. They were paying for an experience that felt real. Repeat bookings increased by 30%. New clientele, specifically socially conscious high-net-worth travelers, flocked to the hotel. A-list celebrities, entrepreneurs, and influencers began promoting it, not just as a place to stay, but as a place that stood for something. And the industry noticed. Major hotels in New York, London, and Dubai started studying the Grand Metropolitan's business model. Some even reached out to Keanu directly, asking how they could implement similar changes. "I told them the truth," Keanu later said in an interview. "It's not a formula. It's just treating people like human beings." One evening, nearly a year after everything had started, Keanu returned to the Grand Metropolitan. This time not as an undercover guest, but as himself. As he stepped through the glass doors, he immediately noticed the difference. The smiles, the energy, the warmth. The same concierge, David, the one who once spoke about guests making impossible demands, was standing by the front desk. Keanu approached with a smirk. "So, did anyone ask for a helicopter in 20 minutes lately?" David laughed. "Not since we started letting staff set real boundaries." Then, something unexpected happened. From the restaurant, the kitchen doors swung open, and out walked a group of staff members holding a framed plaque. At the center was Elena. She looked nervous as she stepped forward. "Mr. Reeves," she said, hesitating before smiling, "we wanted to give you something." She handed him the frame. Keanu took it and turned it over. Inside, behind the glass, was a simple inscription. "Because of you, we feel seen." For the first time in a long time, Keanu had no words. He simply nodded, gripping the frame tighter. One conversation, one night, one moment of listening. That's all it took to set off a change that no one had expected, Because true hospitality isn't about marble floors and high thread count sheets. It's about people. And Keanu Reeves had proven that when people feel valued, they don't just work better. They live better. What do you think? Should more business owners take a hands-on approach to how employees are treated? Would you stay at a hotel where you know the staff is genuinely happy? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in workplaces that value people, hit subscribe and stay with us for more untold stories that inspire change.